God bless you. I'm Minister Jeff Fannell, pastor of On Good Ground Christian Fellowship in Columbus, New Jersey. You know, as we read the Bible, it becomes clear that God desires to bless his people tremendously. And yet, if you're like many born-again believers, you may be wondering, what does it take to truly be blessed of God? Does it take running from conference to conference or from revival to revival? Does it take standing in the $200 prayer line and receiving prayer from the minister of the hour? Does it take some extraordinary work or huge undertaking on your part to truly be blessed of God? Thankfully, the answer to these questions is no. It does not take any of that. To truly be blessed by God, all it takes is a willingness on our part to be used by God to meet the needs of someone else. And that is the simple yet powerful message that God shared with me as he prompted me to write this book called Ministry Brings the Blessing. In Ministry Brings the Blessing, we examine Jesus' miraculous feeding of the 5,000 and come away with 8 powerful principles that every born-again believer needs to know if he or she is going to walk in the abundant blessings and favor of God. The first principle we learn is that ministry is greatly esteemed by God. Now, when we talk about ministry, all we really mean is allowing God to use us to meet the needs of someone else. And we can do that in ways that are both great and small. Second, we learn that real ministry is never convenient. In our scripture text on the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus had just learned that John the Baptist had been beheaded by King Herod. When he received this news, he desired to be apart, to be by himself. And yet when the people saw him, they immediately came running toward him and pressed upon him. In response, Jesus pushed aside his own needs and began to meet their needs. It certainly wasn't the best time for Jesus, and it clearly was not convenient. But real ministry, the type that brings the blessing, never is. Third, we must have a heart to serve. When we see people who are in need, we don't ignore them and we don't ask God to send them away. Instead, we ask God to use us to help meet those needs in the love of Christ. Fourth, ministry that brings the blessing requires trusting God for the miraculous. If we're going to meet the needs of other people, we're going to have to learn to trust God to do those things that we cannot do on our own. Fifth, ministry that brings the blessing requires bringing what you have to Jesus. We need to learn to bring our talents, our abilities, our resources, and even our money and put them in the hands of Jesus. When we do, we too will have more than enough to get the job done. Sixth, ministry that brings the blessing requires us to get out among the people. We simply cannot stay within the 4 walls of our churches or our homes while there are people out there in need. We must get out among them. Seventh, ministry that brings the blessing transforms lives for the better. When you and I allow God to use us in ministry, those in need will have their lives touched by the love of God, and they will be left better off than they were before. Finally, number 8, ministry brings the blessing. After the people were fed that day, Jesus commanded the disciples to gather up the fragments. When they did, the Bible tells us that they had 12 baskets full of food, 1 basket for each disciple. Now remember, the disciples came into this exchange with no food of their own, but each one of them left with a basket full of food, a basket full of blessings, all because they gave of themselves in ministry. So not only were the people blessed that day, but so were the disciples. But God was also blessed. Because you see, God is always blessed when his goodness is revealed in the earth through his people. And on that day, the goodness of God was experienced by all of those thousands of people on that mountainside, because the disciples allowed God to use them in ministry. You see, ministry truly does bring the blessing to other people, to you, and to our God.